to the podcast, everyone. I'm here with Tony Yang, who, talk about a very interesting topic nowadays, particularly in the highly competitive environment. So, Tony, with your background as a recruiter, I thought it'd be great, to kind of discuss why strong candidates get rejected. So, first of all, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Eric.
No worries. Tony, I mean, your background is very interesting. So, why don't you walk us through your background before we get into the topic?
Sure. So I've been in corporate recruiting for the last 12 years, and 9 of which where I was a principal recruiter at Amazon. I basically built teams for Amazon Web Services when I was based in Vancouver, Canada for 5 years. And then the next, 4 years, I transferred to New York here and basically built the teams for Amazon ads. So essentially everything talent acquisition, the immense amount of technical hiring for the organization. And I was also a bar raiser at Amazon as well. And I conducted like over 800 interviews, in my lifetime there. So that's a nutshell about me.
I mean, that demonstrates your street cred when it comes to talking about, why strong candidates get rejected. And I think our
Yeah,
audience in this competitive market are definitely interested in that. So
yeah.
let me talk through it a bit and maybe ask you the first question.
Hmm.
There are lots of strong candidates out there, or at least people perceive themselves as strong candidates, and they always
Hmm.
constantly get passed over. you
Hmm.
know, can you give me maybe an example or an anecdote in terms of where you saw that a genuinely qualified person got passed over for maybe just a fixable reason?
Yeah. So I conducted, like I said, many interviews at Amazon as a bar raiser. One particular one was, I remember it was for Amazon Web Services when we were hiring for a level 6 senior software engineer.
Hmm.
This person came in with very strong technical skills, and we were all, I would say, like in the loop. Like 4 of the interviewers were all inclined for their interviews, but I was the bar raiser on that particular loop, and I came in non-inclined.
Hmm.
And we all might thought I thought they would probably convince me to change my vote, but as I dug deeper as a bar raiser, we all voted that he was very strong technically. He was very strong on paper, but when it came to the behavioral base, the leadership principle questions, uh,
Hmm.
the ownership, the R right a lot, where you make really good judgment, from a senior perspective, like he was just not there. And as a bar raiser, I always ask the question to the hiring manager and say, do you feel this person raises the bar compared to the current L6 population on your team? Do they raise the bar at least 50% of the current L6 population on your team? And when I posed that question after numerous, times, like he didn't give me a firm yes, right? And when he's hesitant, then that means something was missing. And as I dug deeper with all the other interviewers, they basically review their notes and say, you know what, Tony, you're right. Like a lot of the ownership examples, there were a lot of like we versus we
Hmm.
statements. So in the end, we passed on this qualified person, who seems to be, qualified on paper, but we didn't end up hiring, this person. I had to pass it because he just did not raise the bar there.
Interesting. I want to dive a bit deeper into that example, but
Yeah.
I just realized taking a step back, since we're
Hmm.
both current or former Amazonian, can you
Yeah.
maybe describe to the audience who aren't familiar with Amazon and its leadership principles what a bar raiser is, particularly in the interview process?
Yeah, so bar raiser is basically a mandatory person in all the Amazon loops across the company. And the bar raiser serves as a third party individual where they make sure the hiring team is hiring for Amazon and not hiring for that particular team. So for example, like the bar raiser is really there to make sure the hiring manager is not hiring for the sake of hiring or filling their headcount, right? Like we need to make sure this person comes in and raises the Amazon hiring bar. And also the other most important thing is the bar raiser is there to really reduce bias across all interviewers, unconscious bias, recency bias, halo effects, you name it. But he or she is that person who really makes sure to partner with the hiring manager and make sure that we are making the right hiring call. And the bar raiser is the only person who also has the veto right to the bar raiser is only the person who has the right to veto a hire.
Hmm,
Yeah.
interesting. I'm sure our audience will find that fascinating. So, getting back to the
Yeah.
example, I think you hit on something very interesting, right? I
Mhm,
think
mhm.
a lot of people focus on technical skills, right? I'm sure
Yeah.
you've seen, I've seen a lot of people, their after their last name, they have like a dozen certifications, etc., related to that. But you kind of focused on the interpersonal skills, which is where I want to take kind of this conversation because
Mhm.
in the age of generative artificial intelligence or Gen AI, it seems like that interpersonal skills or communication skills are going to be a critical component. Would you say that if someone were preparing for an interview, that's something they should be thinking about how they have examples where that they not only drove it themselves, but had a using Amazon leadership principles, a bias for action in terms of like self knowledge and learning.
Mhm. Yes, I would say soft skills and interpersonal skills, especially now in the AI era, I would say is even more important. Uh, I think a lot of the candidates, they have the skills, have the experience, but they're not able to articulate that to the other side of the table. And when
Mm-hmm.
you're not able to articulate that clearly, you only have 1 hour with that interviewer, you basically miss your chance of getting hired, essentially. And I think that's why every candidate should work on how to communicate their examples, write down their examples, and I'm not saying that you have to like memorize or recite your examples, but then the examples that you should be sharing in your interview are examples that you're fully familiar with. You really live and breathe that example, right? Like you need to make sure that you you have to share examples where you feel most proud of, first and
Mm-hmm.
foremost. If you're not confident about the example, I guarantee you when the interviewer starts digging deep, you're gonna fail. At that point, you're probably just not, or you're just gonna stay very high level. So make sure to communicate clearly, prepare your examples, and really, it's kind of like telling a story and at that point, that confidence will come naturally. And no matter how interviewers ask you different questions from different angles, you will be able to articulate those examples well.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that dive deep principle is increasingly not just for Amazon, but in the age of Gen AI, increasingly
Mhm.
needed, right? It's like
Yeah,
it can't just be theory anymore. It's about practice.
yeah,
And I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of the communication skills about the examples.
hmm
But I think there's I'll call it mental model bias, whether it's early in the career, post MBA, et cetera. It's like, hey, I should, for lack of a better term, fake it till I make it. And,
hmm
because a lot of people are desiring to be people managers, right? To
hmm
manage a team and all that. What would you say to those individuals who's like, hey, you're telling me to dive deep, but I have only an hour and I need to communicate succinctly, but I
hmm
also want to demonstrate that I can manage a team because I don't want to be an individual contributor the rest of my life.
hmm
How does someone balance that, right? Because I think a lot of people are saying, "Hey, I want to communicate strategically, but you're telling me to dive deep, but I want to get to that strategic people management role," as an
hmm
example.
hmm I think that's a very interesting question, and there's always a fine balance, and especially when you're under interview setting, right? There's that extra layer of stress and also, time's ticking as well. But how I would tell that person or that candidate is you still need to share your examples very clearly and
Mhm.
you need to dissect your examples. And I think it's always about key phrases as well, like the phrases that you use, the posture, in terms of like your confidence. Like it shows whether you're an individual contributor versus a people manager through the way how you communicate your examples, through the phrases that the word, the vernacular that you use, the leadership tone that you use. So I think it's just as important though, like don't like even though we're diving deep and really thinking about the strategic part of your example, this strategic strategy that you share indirectly demonstrate you're a leader as well, right? If you're not
Hmm.
able to dive deep and be strategic, I cannot equate you as a leader, essentially. And so not let alone a people leader. So I think it's more about balancing out what to say in your example. I would definitely encourage to those candidates in the short amount of time that you talk about the impact, you talk about metrics, and then how does that impact affect your team or affect the organization that you're part of to also show that people leadership experience as well.
Interesting. I think you hit the nail on the head is that everyone either rotates to either extreme. Either they go too strategic or they go too deep, and then they forget it's like you need to be able to do both, particularly
Yes.
in human centric environments. So, which makes total
Mhm,
sense in an interview.
mhm,
So, I'm
mhm,
going to slightly switch the topic a bit. I think we've talked about interpersonal skills and, kind of diving a bit deeper there. I think you
mhm,
mentioned you only have an hour with these people, right? An
mhm.
hour per interviewer, but they always say, hey, you make your first impression in the first 30 seconds or so of meeting someone, right?
Exactly.
What would you say is the number one mistake candidates make within, let's say, the first 2 minutes of their interview that they should be
Yeah,
addressing?
exactly. And I think this applies not only at Amazon and across different companies. Usually, the moment when you jump on a call or in-person interview, we will have that small introduction of each other. And the interviewer usually lead to open up, the interview and getting you relaxed is tell me a little bit about yourself, or other phrases will be walk me through why you're here today or walk me through your career. And I think those first 2 minutes are golden, and a lot of candidates fail to grasp that opportunity when I interview them as well, because they start to ramble. And when they start to ramble,
Hmm.
to me, that's one of, to me, that was that, to me, that shows you're not prepared for the interview and you are not communicating concisely, essentially. And also, candidates who recite their resumes, and usually interviewers have someone's resume up on their laptop. And if they can tell that you're basically reciting who you are on your resume, that's also a concern for them because they realize you're not able to really articulate yourself naturally in an interview setting. So that's where I would definitely see someone as this is probably not the person that we are looking for when they're not able to really answer that tell me about yourself question in a very natural and a very, in a way, like I also expect that they provide some kind of impact or value that they bring to the team.
Interesting. I'm going to poke a bit more because, again, where this is probably going to go to a very diverse audience,
Mhm.
diverse cultural backgrounds, etc. You mentioned the word ramble. So, in your definition, what is rambling, especially when it comes to an interview? Like, can you be a bit more concrete or precise in terms of
Yes.
your definition there?
Absolutely. So when I say ramble is what I meant is candidates are not able to basically stop and basically give the torch back to the interviewer to ask the next question. Because one, they're probably feeling very nervous. Why is the interviewer not, interjecting? Or two is sometimes the interviewer will literally just sit there and, test them, right? If you keep rambling, that shows you're not confident. You're trying to say something to get the interviewer's attention to have a conversation with you, but you're not, the things that you're saying are not actually adding value, and the interviewer probably don't want to continue down that path. So that's when I say it's ramble. It's a collection of thoughts where it's not organized,
Hmm.
and it basically shows that you're not confident at the end of the day.
Interesting. I think, one of the things I always tell everyone is that they should have a tagline, right? That you
Mhm,
want to be memorable. It's almost like if you're Coca-Cola, right? Or
mhm.
Nike, just do it. It's like you want that
Yeah.
memorable nature. What would you say, because our careers change over time, our paths take different paths, we get different experiences. What would you say is a good way to practice that component? Because everyone's, usually focused on the actual, let's say, technical questions versus, hey,
Mhm.
what's my brand? If I
Yeah.
were a corporation, hypothetically.
Yeah, so I have a formula that I help my clients with is you should summarize that question. You should be able to answer that question within 3 to 4 sentences, right? So you start off with who you are, your identity. So what's your, for example, if you're an engineer, you say I'm a senior software engineer with with X number of years of experience, and then literally you dive right into currently I'm really working on AI or like I'm specializing in this particular tools, skills, whatever it is that applies to the role that you're applying to. And then you kind of like end it off and wrap it up with, "Hey, this is how I'd add value to the team, the reason why I'm here today, what I bring to the table." And then the fourth one is, how you want to wrap it up casually. How I would do it is I'm also here to learn about more about you, and I hopefully in this 1 hour conversation, I get to learn more about what you do, from an interviewer perspective and about the company. So very naturally, you can summarize in between 3 to 5 sentences. It's kind of like a formula, and then you give the torch back to the interviewer to ask the next question, essentially.
Interesting. I think you hit the nail on the head with our last question. It kind of has been leading down this path. There's a lot of psychology or sociology involved in terms of understanding human behavior and human emotions. So,
Hmm.
one of the big things that I think a lot of candidates don't necessarily consider is their body language or their communication
Hmm.
pattern, right?
hmm
You've seen
hmm
thousands of interviews. Are there
hmm
things that turn off interviewers when it comes to a potential candidate in terms of their body language or their communication patterns?
Yeah, I would say in the virtual interview, right now, a lot of the interviews are conducted online through a laptop. You probably won't see a lot of like hand gesture just because they could be under the table and you just won't see it.
Hmm.
But one thing I really notice is eye contact. Even during virtual interview, is it's like they're not looking into the camera. Candidates who are not confident, they're not looking into the camera. They're looking somewhere. It could be
Hmm.
they're looking at a monitor, maybe they prepare some kind of scripts, for the answers, or they're literally just nervous and don't want to look into the interviewer's eyes. That's definitely one thing I will pick up, as an interviewer and know right away that this person either is not confident, or if I'm hiring for a leadership position, this person, I will definitely note this down in the debrief and talk about it. The
Yeah.
other thing I noticed, candidates who are not as experienced or not as senior are the ones who will apologize in the interview. Like, for example, what I mean by that is they will say, "Oh, sorry, this is what I meant," or "Oh, sorry, this is what I was trying to, what I was trying to say." The more you say that, it shows to you're not exhibiting confidence. And if I'm trying to hire you, let's say as a senior manager or even, let's say director role, like to me, that's just a no-no, right? At that point, like you're not showing confidence, you're not being assertive. I rather you say, "Hey, I don't know," and raise your hand, be very honest, but this is how I would approach it versus, you keep apologizing.
Hmm. Interesting. How would you uh, as a candidate, how would I maybe potentially learn or find out if I have some of those patterns that or body language that would kill off an interview? I think a lot of people go in, they think they're doing the right thing, but they don't notice those
Mhm.
subconscious patterns. So, is there anything that you recommend in terms of how candidates might be able to identify or maybe correct those patterns?
Yeah, of course. So I work with clients, and one of the services I provide is mock interviews as well. So we do a lot of like mock interviews, and literally we record a meeting, and then I have the candidates to really look at themselves, through the recording, how they kind of, and a lot of the times, 98% of the times, they were just like, "Oh, I didn't know I came across that way." Right. So
Hmm.
it's very different of you just interviewing, with someone versus you actually looking at yourself, how you interview. It's very different. So I think one of the best practices is, like we all say, practice makes perfect, is try to start recording yourself, before and talking to yourself, right? Or talking to yourself in the mirror too. If you don't want to record yourself, talk to yourself in the mirror, look at yourself while you're talking, and you will become better at it.
It's interesting. I always tell everyone at least, take a beginner acting class because it really teaches you those subconscious cues. And then you actually have
Yeah.
someone looking at you and saying, "Oh, by the way, did you know you had this nervous tick or something like
Yeah,
that?" So it makes
exactly.
total sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. All right. As we're talking about psychology and the language that people use on top of the body language,
Mhm.
you've seen hundreds, if not thousands, of different candidates. What's, some of the communication skills or some of the things that candidates might say that will cause the recruiter to say, no, we're not proceeding any further, or have them lose immediate interest.
Yeah. So coming from a recruiter lens, as a recruiter, I've conducted thousands of recruiter calls. And a lot of the candidates that I do definitely will not pass on to the next stage to hiring manager are the ones where I always ask candidates, this after, towards the end of our recruiter call is why you're interested in this role? Like, why are you here today, essentially? And the candidates who give me very vague answers, like, or it's even like formula and like textbook answers, like, oh, I'm just here, I want to learn and grow. Like those phrases will really just will really push me to like not push them forward like right away. Like my decision will definitely be not inclined in Amazon standard, right away, right? Because that shows me that one, you're not really passionate, about this role. You're probably just applying for a job and or you basically mass fire, tons of, resume to a lot of different companies. The second thing I would say is candidates who talk about their previous companies in the sense that they're sort of bad mouthing, like, oh, I cannot stand at my current place anymore, because that shows to me that this person might be very hard to work with or can come in very disruptive, as well. And then I do not want to push anyone forward who will who have any risk of disrupting the culture or disrupting the team with those type of behaviors. So that's the second thing that will just really push me to the other end of the spectrum and not move them forward.
Interesting. How would you, or what would you tell candidates then that they should be saying, particularly when it comes to their interest in the role? Is it they should be at least doing a basic deep dive? I mean, with Amazon, for instance, it's, hey, I mean, I know usually recruiting provides like our leadership principles, go to the website, publicly traded, so we have the 10Ks. Is there anything else candidates should be doing as they think about how they would respond to that question from a recruiter?
Yeah, I would say you should definitely do some research and homework in the sense, really know the job description and find out who the team is, right? Find out who the team is, who the hiring manager is, what are the current projects, they are working on. And if you're a software engineer, like talk about what are the tools or technologies that you want to learn by joining Amazon. And then mention that, hey, if I, can join Amazon, as an engineer, I would love to learn this and this, right? To show you're passionate, or at least to show that you have some kind of career direction. Or like if you're coming from a small company and jumping into a big tech, talk about the impact. Say, I want to take on more scope,
Mhm.
more opportunities, right? To better myself, that way. So those are some insights that I would or tips that I will tell candidates that you do need to do some research before you jump on the call with the recruiter because this question, I would say 90% of the time will come up.
That makes sense. All right, let's move to a slightly thorny, slightly interesting question, especially in today's job market, is, about qualifications.
Okay.
Is there anything like being too qualified? Can a candidate be passed for being overqualified?
Absolutely, yes. And I think this is something that nobody really talks about. Honestly,
Hmm.
like I've passed on candidates, who were overqualified, not because of their skills, but because of the risk, essentially. So if someone, for example, has been a director and then they want to apply for a senior engineering manager position, to me, I that actually is a yellow flag for me. Like, why would you do that, right? Because it's a step down of your role, or are you just des desperate, right? To apply for any role and you're not really thinking clearly what it is that you really want in your next career. Because I rather not hire someone versus than hiring the wrong person and then wasting the entire team or like hiring managers time to ramp up this person and knowing that this person could leave, a flight risk, in the next 6 months, right? Because ultimately, if you're overqualified for that particular role, you will get bored. Let's be honest. Like you will get bored after 6 months and you will start inside of you will start eating you that, oh, I shouldn't have taken on this, or I should have been more careful, or not undervalue myself and take on a role that is not at the scope that I am at right at this point.
Interesting. So many directions to go there.
Yeah.
So with that response, I mean, what do you say to people who maybe are looking to make a drastic career change, right? So, for example, I have an MBA. You know, the famous thing with MBAs is like, I want to do a career pivot, right? I want to move from
Hmm.
industry A to industry B.
Hmm.
And usually you have to take a step or two down. So
Hmm.
how would you position, or how would a candidate position themselves if they're genuinely, A, to your point, there's that prerequisite which you've mentioned of they really know what they want to do, they are interested in making a career pivot, and they know they may have to take a step or two down.
Hmm. I think there is a slight difference between going for a role that is under you, but you just want a job versus a career pivot person, essentially.
Hmm.
Because I think the career pivot person, if you have legitimate reason and you demonstrate that through the interview and show the qualification of what you had before, but versus where you want to be in the next few years, I think that's a legit reason. And some people, the recruiters, hiring managers, like they will bring this person on, right? Knowing that yes, even though they have 10 years of experience in this industry, but now they're looking to pivot into this industry with limited experience. I think that's totally fair. And I think everyone deserves a chance in the sense that they should be, going after a career that they're passionate about. So it's again, it ties back to that communication, how clear you are to communicate your value, to the interview team versus you're literally, a director of engineering and you're just taking on a senior engineering manager for another role just because, let's say right now you're not employed for whatever reason.
Hmm. Interesting. I think a lot of people would say, well, I do have legitimate reason for a career pivot, and this is before the interview stage. How would they signal that? Like they really thought about it and they do want a career pivot on their resume, hypothetically.
Sorry, can you repeat that question again,
Yeah, no
Eric?
worries.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
because you talked about, hey, if you have clear intent in terms of your career pivot and
Hmm.
you can verbalize it, but
Hmm.
usually most people have trouble at the resume stage, right? Like the
Mm.
written aspect. So are there
Yeah.
things that you might be looking for to say, hey, this is a legit career pivot versus, hey, I just need a job? I think
Yeah.
that's what a lot of people are trying to like wrap their heads around.
Absolutely. And I think that's super important. And in the sense, I think you should just be very honest about it, be very transparent. And you know how on resume, I always teach my client that you should have a profile summary that summarize who you are. And
Hmm.
that statement should definitely be there, right at the very top, right? I am X person. Let's say I'm an engineer for 5 years for at X company, but now I want to shift into becoming a product manager, for example, right?
Hmm.
And I want to take on this role. So that statement should be literally very clear in that profile summary. That should also reflect that on your LinkedIn as well, and be very honest that this is the career pivot that you want to make a change. And then I always tell people that under the About Me section on LinkedIn, you can definitely say open to X role, Y role, like basically the roles that you want to pivot to. So when recruiter or hiring manager sees it, yes, they see that you're an engineer, but if you have a beautiful, profile summary written why you want to make a career change, people will still call you, if it's the right role for you.
Interesting. All right, that's good to know. And it leads to maybe the one of the final questions, which is, one of the prerequisites of all the questions that we've just talked about over the past few minutes is that people know what they want to do. And I mean, this could be another podcast, let's be perfectly honest,
Hmm.
about what they need
Yeah.
to dive into. But
Yeah.
what are some things that people should start thinking about of like, hey, what value can I truly bring to a company? And then B, what do I want from a career? Like, how should they start thinking about what frameworks should they be maybe potentially leveraging?
Yeah, I think people should always have a 3 to 5 year plan down the road in terms of a career. Yes, you can think about, for example, let's say if you graduated or you just completed your master in an MBA or computer science, uh, you obviously you want to dive right into like an engineer role, but you should already have a 3 to 5 year plan. Do I see myself? Do I want to be a people leader, or do I want to be an individual contributor but dive really deep into what I like? So you should have constant, and this is where I think a good manager comes in or a good mentor comes in, is you constantly have those conversations. So, and they will provide you clarity, and day by day, on your job, there will be moments in your career you will start realizing, or during a meeting or during some kind of event, you will start realizing, hey, this is where I'm actually really good at. And this is where I'm really good at. And maybe that's the path where it just comes so naturally, for me, in this particular area. And that's the path I want to go down. So having very having those structured conversations with your manager and or a mentor if you have, which I hope, which I always encourage everyone to have one. It would really help you, to shape your career.
Excellent. So, Tony, usually at the end of the podcast, I always like to leave the last word to our guests. So, any
Okay.
final words to our audience on this topic or anything else that you want them to remember?
Interesting. I would probably say, I know right now it's a very tough market out there, especially with the whole AI, compounded. And there's so many layoffs, going on, especially in the tech job market. I just want to tell everyone that you will find something that you like. It's just a matter of time, but you do need to invest in yourself. You really invest in the job search process and really build your resume, LinkedIn, and make it very different and make it yours so you're not one of the many. Because right now everyone is writing, maybe everyone as we're speaking, everyone is probably using AI to write resumes, to do mock interview. Those are all useful tools, but at the end of the day, you are who you are. You still need to brand yourself or have some kind of your own personality to distinguish yourself from others.
Interesting. So you're emphasizing the individualism, which I
Yes.
admire there. So 100%. Well, Tony,
Yeah.
thank you again for joining the podcast.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.